The year is 1959. And you're a soldier living in an army barracks filled with around 200 people. You have what appears to be a well-rounded life. There's a church, a hospital, and of course, your living quarters. Every day you get up and go to work at the plant. Your fellow co-workers are conducting all sorts of experiments. At first glance, there's nothing all that remarkable about it, but something's off. For one, there isn't any daylight, and it's cold, very, very cold. The electricity that buzzes in the walls around you comes from a portable nuclear reactor. The water you drink is mined from a glacier. This army barracks is entirely underground in the middle of the Arctic. What we're about to show you was once highly classified and top secret. Until now.
So we didn't know about it at first, but it came up in the archival materials and in the documents we were looking at. We came across a box where it was just a kind of a cardboard box where it said Camp Century on it. So I said to the researcher, "What is this?"
The true purpose of this city went far beyond housing. To the outside world, it was called Camp Century, but to the US military, it was known as something else entirely.
I went out there in April of 1962. When I got off of the plane, it was minus 50 degrees and blowing snow. I was very happy as they took me down into the tunnel to get inside. It was startling as I came in.
Welcome to Project Iceworm, the atomic city carved under the ice. There are some places on Earth that mankind is just not meant to go. The Arctic is without a doubt one of them. Here in the very north of the northernmost country in the world, temperatures reach as low as minus 50 degrees Celsius. 80% of the land is covered by an enormous ice sheet, more than 3 kilometers thick. To put that in perspective, this is the city of New York, and this is how high that ice sheet would rise. In winter, the polar nights can last weeks or even months. Months of oppressive, icy darkness. There are often blizzards that hurtle across the region at 72 kilometers an hour. And don't even get us started on whiteouts. Extreme blizzards that wipe away everything around you in a dense layer of fog, snow and wind until all you can see is white. Just white. It was here, of all places, that America decided to build a city. And that was just a starting point, a prototype. Camp Century was the beginning of what was supposed to be a whole region of cities and bases that would encompass an area 3 times the size of Denmark. But why the hell would they build it here? Well, America has been fascinated with Greenland for a long time.
The US offered to buy Greenland in 1946 from Denmark because of its strategic significance. But Denmark declined at the time and said, we may owe a lot to the Americans, but I don't think we owe them the entire island of Greenland.
You might even remember the country making a few small headlines in early 2025.
President Trump is not giving up his efforts to buy Greenland from Denmark.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes.
And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Greenland has been part of the Danish kingdom for 800 years. Mr. Trump, f*** off.
Greenland has always been geopolitically important, and if we zoom out a little bit, you'll start to see why. It sits almost directly in between the US and Russia, 2 countries that have always had a rather icy relationship.
Rather than buying Greenland, there was an agreement between the US and Denmark about the defense of Greenland. It came into effect in 1951. And according to this agreement, the US was allowed to have military bases in Greenland.
In fact, the US established Thule Air Base, a military installation here, all the way back in 1951. Back when America was great? Well, if not great, then incredibly paranoid and willing to spend billions on it.
Even back in the 1950s, you couldn't afford just to sit back and watch technology advance right past you, but it's especially true in today's tech-savvy world, where AI is talked about by everyone, but most of us have no idea how it actually works. Businesses across the planet are using it to boost efficiency, but how? Well, luckily Outskill can help you figure it out. This weekend, you can join the 2-day AI Mastermind Workshop by Outskill, the world's first AI-focused education platform. By attending just 16 hours with expert mentors, learners have built and shipped over 100 AI products, all with zero code and working revenue models of 3 to 4K. Now, this training normally costs $895, but we've partnered with Outskill to give away 1,000 free seats for the B1M's viewers just for the next 72 hours. And with a 4.9 out of 5 rating on Trustpilot, you can be pretty sure these guys know their stuff. You get free lifetime access to Outskill's exclusive paid AI community to grow alongside 5,000 AI-first professionals. Over 10 million people have attended this training in the past year across different industries, and now it's your turn. During the 2-day live training, you'll learn all about powerful AI tools, prompt engineering, workflow automation, and how to build AI products without code. Plus, if you sign up now, you'll get exclusive bonuses worth over $5,000. So clear your weekend, it's happening this Saturday and Sunday between 10 AM and 7 PM on both days. Limited seats are available and they're filling up fast. You can grab yours now down at the link in the description. Don't forget that every time you go and check out our video sponsors, it massively supports the channel, so thanks in advance for taking the time to go and have a look at Outskill. Now, let's get back to the 1950s.
Housewives, rock and roll, Hollywood's golden age, and the Cold War. The 1950s saw incredible economic prosperity in a post-war boom. America emerged as a superpower and the country had cash to burn. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the USSR presented an alternative vision to America's kitchen capitalism. There was rapid industrialization and urbanization, and the start of the space race. It was this little noise that pushed the Americans into building Camp Century. These little beeps changed human civilization forever. They came, of course, from Sputnik, the first human-made object to orbit the Earth. All over America, anyone with a shortwave radio receiver could tune in and hear those beeps coming from a satellite high above them. Naturally, the American military worried the Soviet Union would attach missiles to it. This fear drove the army to put together a proposal for a new kind of base, a city under the ice in the Arctic, close to the Soviets. The project would go further than the already existing Thule Air Base, further than anything built before.
First of all, this was during the early days of the Cold War, and the United States were enacting their so-called polar or Arctic strategy.
To the rest of the world, it was presented as Camp Century, a research station in one of the most remote locations on Earth. America was so great, it could build anywhere. It could make even the harshest environment hospitable. At least, that's what they told the press. Indeed, they even invited journalists from magazines like National Geographic to tour the labyrinth of tunnels and underground buildings.
Camp Century was not a secret at all. In contrast, it was kind of a publicity stunt, if you like, from the US Army, who presented it as a sort of an exciting adventure into construction work in the Arctic.
Even within the army itself, its true purpose was strictly on a need-to-know basis, kept from most of the soldiers that were actually stationed there. We spoke to Robert Weiss, a physician who was based at Camp Century in 1963.
I didn't realize I was going to go to Greenland, and I remember going to meet the colonel the first time, and then he said to me, within a week you will be flying to Camp Century, Greenland, 800 miles from the North Pole. And I looked at him, I said, "You're kidding." So it was an adventure.
The army claimed this bizarre place was to be used to study glaciology, the climate, and human survival in extreme cold.
There were these so-called defense areas, which included Thule Air Base, where the Americans were essentially allowed to do whatever they wanted to. But if they wanted to operate outside these defense areas, they had to ask Denmark for permission. So when the US asked for permission to build Camp Century, they were not too open about the real purpose of Camp Century.
Now, decades later, those files have been declassified and we can share with you its true purpose. This is Project Iceworm. It was to house more than 600 nuclear missiles in a vast tunnel network 3 times the size of Denmark. These missiles would be mobile and hidden beneath the ice, making them hard for the Soviet Union to detect or destroy in a first strike.
The Danish government realized this is going to happen whether we like it or not. The strategy from the Danish government was really to downplay the military significance.
I did not know Iceworm. I did not know any plans to put nuclear missiles in there.
It was a wild idea. It's even more wild how close the Americans came to actually completing it, because building anything at all here is next to impossible.
Camp Century was the first permanent base under glacial ice anywhere in the world.
You may notice there are no hardware stores here. There are no shops, no highways, no airports. Every single thing has to be shipped from miles away to Thule Air Base, a treacherous journey in itself across icy, unpredictable seas. Thule was only accessible during the brief summer window when the Arctic sea ice receded enough for ships to dock. The location for Project Iceworm is here, 204 kilometers away. That's like going from New York to Philadelphia, and you'd still have a quarter of the journey left to go. Food, fuel and equipment all had to be dragged on sleds in convoys.
They used heavy swings, which refers to a kind of a system of tractor-pull sled trains, which were used to transport materials and equipment, but also personnel. It took them about 3 or maybe sometimes 4 days to cover the entire Camp Century trails.
A temporary oversnow supply route known as the Ice Cap Trail was prepared and maintained between Thule and Camp Century. Engineers had to deal with crevices, extreme cold, and constantly shifting ice. And at the end of that enormous journey, they would be here, ostensibly in the middle of nowhere. But before anything could be built, first, the tunnels had to be dug.
Construction of Camp Century took place over 2 summers of 1959 and 1960. Because of the weather, they had to work quite fast to do all the tunnels, and they were essentially working 24 hours a day.
Engineers used a cut and cover method to carve them out under the snow. First, large trenches were dug using Swiss-made snow milling machines called Peter plows. Originally designed for clearing roads in the Swiss Alps, these incredible machines could move up to 594 cubic meters of snow every hour. The snow would be pushed out of the tunnels where it would condense. Ploughed snow has a greater density and weight than regular snow, which is perfect for construction. Curved metal sheets would then be placed above like this, and snow would be piled on top, hiding the tunnels beneath. Prefabricated structures were then assembled and placed in the tunnels on stilts. This reduced heat transfer and kept the interiors warm. It would take about a day for the construction crew to erect each building. Piece by piece, an entire town was built this way. Tunnels were bored into the ice. There was even a main street, off which living quarters, latrines, generators, mess halls and more all branched off of. There was an incredible amount of cutting-edge engineering just to keep this place livable.
So the main challenge in Camp Century was not keeping warm, but it was actually keeping cold.
A ventilation system sucked in cold surface air and blew it through the tunnels and out to the surface. Tunnel air had to be kept at minus 15 degrees Celsius, otherwise everything would melt.
They found out that that was actually a huge problem, because when you have machines operating and men working, there's going to be a lot of heat inside the tunnels, and the heat was hard to get rid of. You can imagine that the ice is becoming slushy and it's harder to walk or drive inside the tunnels, but it also made the tunnels more unstable. And they didn't prepare for this, but they had to build sort of huge ventilator systems that would ventilate the tunnels in order to take out the heat.
To avoid the nearly impossible challenge of getting a steady supply of diesel for a generator, power was provided by a portable nuclear reactor, the first of its kind, but not the last.
It was about 1.5 megawatt, and it was modular, which means that it could essentially be transported to the base in smaller pieces, and then it could be constructed at the base. So it was essentially the idea that you could provide energy independence in extreme or remote environments. It was the first nuclear reactor on Danish soil, and it actually caused a bit of a problem in the Danish government because there was no regulations or no idea on how to control or even to think about responsibility in case of an accident.
Perhaps most unsettling of all was how the camp got its water. It was actually an ingenious solution developed by the base's engineer, Raul Rodriguez. A hole was dug 150 metres deep, that's the height of an ordinary skyscraper, and a heated element was dropped into the ice. It would melt the ice around it and create a reservoir with more than 37,000 litres of drinkable water. To stave off boredom in the camp, the men would take turns dropping themselves down the well for the thrill, hanging in the enormous cavern in complete darkness. And boredom was a serious issue. Despite all the luxuries of home, there wasn't much to do on the camp, and the isolation could really get to people.
Never have so many gotten up so early to do so little for so long. That was what the officers would say to each other. I think you keep yourself busy. I learned to like that type of life. In fact, as a physician, I had probably less work to do than the enlisted men who were doing the hard work, building things out on the snowcap. But I had time to play bridge at night, to play chess periodically, listen to music. When I woke up in the morning, I would quote Voltaire, "This is the best of all possible worlds." The officers' quarter would be divided into rooms with just hanging blankets. That's all. They were kitchens. The food was excellent. I think they calculated out to 8,000 calories per man per day. The only thing that was short was fresh vegetables. A watermelon would be a luxury and a rarity.
Everybody had their job. The site functioned effectively as a little town.
The camp commander would go around, make sure the construction was proper. They were experts on electricians, plumbers.
While the base was a secret pilot program for nuclear missiles, it was also a psychological experiment. The army needed to see if these men could actually live in this ice town so far from civilization without falling to pieces. The US government was especially interested to see how they would fare in extreme isolation, as they were getting ready to send the first men into space.
All I knew is that one of the basic reasons for the camp was, could people live out in this type of environment? Most of it was white, and it would be snow. You wouldn't see a mountain or anything else, but most of it was just barren snow. Just barren snow.
Because if you could operate in these very difficult and harsh environments, then why couldn't you also have a base on the moon? There were also more extreme psychological experiments going on, hunger experiments where the men semi-voluntarily, I guess, didn't have a lot to eat for several days at a time, and they were trying to find out how that would also affect the personnel.
To all extents and purposes, these psychological tests were actually successful.
There was no fights or revolts or anything going on. They did live there in a peaceful manner and an orderly manner. They did conclude that the Camp Century concept was a feasible concept.
If the entire project had been as successful as the psychological experiments, more tunnels would have been created, burrowing outwards for hundreds of miles. Rail tracks would have been laid, and yes, more than 600 missile silos would have been readied. But it wasn't successful. Engineer Raul Rodriguez, while brilliant, failed to take into account how quickly the ice sheet around the base would move. Soldiers were constantly roaming around the tunnels with chainsaws, keeping the ice at bay, but it was no use. Over time, the ice deformed and shifted, causing tunnels to warp, collapse, and become structurally unsafe. There was no place for an atomic reactor, let alone 600 missiles. The reactor was put offline in 1963, and 3 years later, the base was abandoned. By 1969, it was a total ruin. Steel structures had collapsed in on themselves, wooden beams had splintered, and soon the ice had reclaimed almost everything. As Cold War military tech evolved, other systems like submarine-launched ballistic missiles and ICBMs made Project Iceworm obsolete. But at the end of the day, maintaining Camp Century just became too expensive for its limited scientific and military returns. The US Army found it wasn't cost-effective to keep repairing tunnels and supplying personnel. And that could have been the end of the story. A startling example of Cold War excess and the enormous resources that the US government was prepared to throw at truly bizarre concepts. Almost science fiction in its scope, Camp Century would not even be thought up today. Except that's not the end of the story. Not even close. While Project Iceworm's soldiers were busy with their atomic reactor and psychological experiments, they were also doing something else. They were digging. Nobody in the army realised how important this would be, but scientists on this base drilled a hole through nearly 1,390 metres of ice and reached Greenland's ancient surface. They took samples, which then sat in jars, untouched for decades. Geoscientist Paul Bierman discovered the frozen samples in Denmark. He and several of his colleagues at the University of Vermont studied them and came to a disturbing conclusion that would have ramifications for the entire world. Until 2019, scientists had believed that the enormous ice sheet was several million years old, but Greenland's ice sheet was younger than we had thought. Much, much younger. Greenland is more susceptible to changes in Earth's climate than we had thought, meaning that if worldwide temperatures rose again and the climate warmed, more of this enormous ice sheet would melt into the ocean, causing sea levels to rise and potentially disturbing the vitally important North Atlantic current. Camp Century was lost decades ago. The ice moved and crushed the steel and wood that was left behind. Nature reclaimed it, until an accident brought it back to the surface. NASA scientist Chad Green flew over Greenland in April of 2024 to map ice sheets and estimate future sea level rise, and to his great surprise, his radar picked up something else. The distinct tunnels of Camp Century, crushed and distorted, but still very much there. As strange as it sounds, this is only the most recent example of Camp Century being rediscovered. In 2016, the camp was also discovered. That time, however, the Danish learned something disturbing. In 1967, when the Americans abandoned the base, they left toxic radioactive waste behind. At the time, the Danes allowed it to be left, deeming it to be below levels that were considered alarming. But now, the ice is melting faster than anticipated, and that toxic waste, once thought to be buried forever under the ice, could resurface.
In about 70 or maybe 100 years' time, there will be meltwater coming down to expose the buried waste in Camp Century. And this is biological waste, it's chemical waste, and it's radiological waste. And some of this waste could be carried out into the ocean. And this sparked a huge debate in Denmark. According to the 1951 treaty, it's actually the responsibility of Denmark to clean up after US military operations. So there's no legal responsibility on behalf of the Americans, but there is a kind of moral responsibility, I would argue.
It's currently not technically or economically feasible to safely remove the waste, yet inaction could become dangerous over time. All these decades later, Camp Century stands, albeit in ruins, simultaneously as a wild fantasy, a frightening reality, and a still tantalizing mystery.
But there's still a lot of things we don't know about Project Iceworm. Who exactly was it that was behind it, and how was it discussed and received in different parts of the army and also into political circles?
Unanticipated by everyone involved, its legacy is now deeply rooted in the planet's own uncertain future.
Don't forget, you can find out more about today's video sponsor Outskill at the link in the description. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you subscribe to the B1M.